The envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning, crisp and ivory white, with my name written across the front in my mother's careful cursive. I remember standing in the lobby of my apartment building in Houston, still in my work blazer, holding it like it was something fragile. Inside was a formal invitation to my sister Odette's debut, a debutante presentation being held at the Grand Veranda Ballroom in New Orleans, Louisiana. There was also a handwritten note tucked behind it, just 4 lines in Odette's loopy, girlish handwriting. Said, "I know things have been distant, but I want you there. It wouldn't mean anything without you. Please come, Ray." She hadn't called me that since we were children. I flew to New Orleans 3 weeks later with a garment bag over one shoulder and 18 years of complicated history pressing down on the other. I sat in the front row of that ballroom in a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. I watched my sister descend a staircase in a gown that cost more than my first car. I smiled. I clapped. I told myself this was a new beginning. I let myself believe for one single evening that this family was capable of being something different. 6 weeks after that, a collections notice arrived at my Houston apartment with my name printed at the top. $41,000. For a venue package, a full catering arrangement, a floral contract, and a live string quartet. All for a debut I had attended as nothing more than a guest in the audience. My name was listed as the guarantor on every single document. I had never signed a thing. I had never been asked. I had never even been told a contract existed. What I did next made my entire family go completely silent. And before I take you all the way back to the beginning, if this kind of story speaks to you, the kind about family, forgery, and what happens when you finally stop absorbing damage that was never yours to carry, please take a moment to subscribe. I share stories like this one because someone out there needs to hear that they are not alone, that they are not crazy, and that they are not wrong for finally saying enough is enough. My name is Aurelia Voss. I am 31 years old. I am a licensed financial auditor based in Houston, Texas, and I have spent the last 6 years building a life that is entirely, deliberately, and unapologetically mine. I want to tell you about the family I came from, not because I want your sympathy but because none of what happened later makes any sense without it. My parents, Roland and Cecile Voss, raised 2 daughters in a house on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain, just outside New Orleans. Roland ran a mid-size event rental company, chairs, linens, lighting rigs, the kind of business that sounds glamorous at dinner parties until you actually see the financial statements. Cecile taught piano lessons from a small studio she'd built in the back of the house, and spent the remaining hours of every day making sure that the Voss family looked, to absolutely anyone watching, like a family that had everything together. Appearances were not just important to my mother. They were the entire operating system she ran on. I was the older daughter by 5 years. Odette arrived when I was 5 and immediately rearranged the entire household around herself. The way a stone dropped into still water sends every ripple outward without asking permission. She was charming in the way certain people are charming. Not because they work at it but because the world has always responded to them as though their comfort is the natural priority. Teachers adored her. Neighbors remembered her birthday without being reminded. My father called her his little pearl without a trace of awareness about what that phrase quietly implied about the rest of us. I was not the little pearl. I was the responsible one, which in our household was simply the polite way of saying the invisible one. I set my own alarm clock by the time I was 8. I filled out my own school permission forms by 10 because my mother was busy with Odette's piano recital preparation and my father worked Saturdays. When I was 14, I got a part-time job at a bakery 2 streets over because I had already understood at 14 that asking my parents for things they hadn't thought to offer was an exercise that produced nothing but disappointment for everyone involved. That same year, Odette received a brand new bedroom set because she said the old one felt babyish. Nobody thought to ask how my room felt. Nobody thought to ask much about me at all. I left home at 18 on a partial academic scholarship to the University of Texas at Austin. My father shook my hand at the front door. My mother gave me a foil-wrapped casserole and told me to call when I landed. Odette, who was 13 at the time, waved from the porch without looking up from her phone. That was the send-off. I did not expect more. I had spent enough years in that house to understand what I was and wasn't worth asking for. I graduated with honors, sat for my CPA licensure exam on the first attempt, and spent the years that followed building a career in financial compliance and auditing that I was genuinely, privately proud of. I moved to Houston at 25. I found a one-bedroom apartment on the west side of the city where every piece of furniture was chosen on purpose, paid for completely, and belonged to no one but me. I was not running from my family when I built that life. I was simply building something they had never shown me how to want for myself. Contact with home was sporadic and functional. My mother called when she needed help interpreting an insurance document or when she had already made a decision and wanted confirmation that it was correct. My father remembered my birthday most years. Odette texted in clusters. A flurry of messages over a weekend, friendly and demanding in equal measure, and then nothing for months. I existed at the edges of their lives. Present enough to be called upon. Easy enough to forget. Then the invitation arrived. Ivory envelope. My mother's handwriting. Odette's note tucked inside. That name stopped me in the middle of the lobby with my blazer still on and my bag still in my hand. It was the name she used when we were small, when she was 5 and I was 10, and she would follow me around the backyard insisting I play along with whatever world she was building in her imagination. Back when I was still someone she looked at like I mattered to her specifically. I sat with that note for 3 days before I booked the flight. And I want to be honest about why I went, because it matters to everything that came after. I did not go for the debut. I did not go out of obligation or guilt or because I thought it would be a pleasant trip. I went because that 4-line note written in loopy girlish handwriting made me wonder for just a moment if something had shifted. If the distance of years had made them see things differently. If Ray still meant something to someone in that house. I should have trusted what I do for a living. I am a financial auditor. I read documents the way other people read faces. Carefully, skeptically, looking for what doesn't belong. I have built my entire professional reputation on catching the detail that was meant to be overlooked, the obligation buried inside language designed to look like something else entirely. I do this every single day without fail. And yet when my own family handed me something that looked like an invitation, I forgot every instinct I had ever developed and held on with both hands. The debut itself was held on a Saturday evening in late October. The Grand Veranda Ballroom in the Garden District of New Orleans was precisely as extravagant as its name promised. Vaulted ceilings, cascading chandeliers that threw prisms across the walls, white gardenia arrangements stacked in towers along every aisle. Odette descended the main staircase in a blush pink gown with a cathedral-length train and a tiara that caught the light from 30 feet away. My mother sat beside me in the front row, silk handkerchief pressed to the corner of her eye. My father stood near the back of the room with the composed, satisfied expression of a man who had been describing this evening to other people for months and was now finally collecting on the performance. I watched my sister take her bow to the room. I watched her smile with the particular ease of someone who has never once doubted that a room full of people is exactly where she belongs. And I felt something that I still find difficult to name. Not quite envy, not quite grief, but something that lived in the space between them. The quiet ache of watching someone receive in a single evening, the kind of deliberate celebration that was never once directed your way. I stayed through dinner, through the dancing, through the dessert table that I later calculated must have cost somewhere close to $4,000 on its own. At the end of the night, I hugged Odette near the ballroom doors. She smelled like gardenias and expensive hairspray, and she held on for exactly 1 second longer than I expected her to. I carried that 1 second home with me on the flight back to Houston like it was evidence of something real. 6 weeks later, when the collections notice arrived with my name at the top of a $41,000 debt I had never agreed to carry, I thought about that extra second. I thought about the handwritten note. I thought about the word Ray written in ink like it still meant something. And then I stopped feeling wounded and started paying very close attention. The collections notice did not arrive alone. That was the first thing I noticed when I spread everything out on my kitchen table under the overhead light. There were 4 separate documents folded inside the envelope, each one printed on official letterhead, each one carrying my name in a field that should have required my presence, my identification, and my actual hand holding an actual pen. A venue guarantor agreement with the Grand Veranda Ballroom. A catering service contract with a company called Magnolia and Table. A floral arrangements deposit confirmation from a florist named Celestine Blooms. And a performance booking contract for a string quartet called the Crescent Ensemble. 4 documents. 4 signatures. 1 name. None of it mine. I set them in a row and stood back and looked at them the way I look at a balance sheet that doesn't reconcile, with the specific kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from the part of your brain that has already started working before the rest of you has caught up. I had not signed these documents. I had not been present when they were signed. I had not even been told they existed. And yet there was my name, repeated across 4 separate pages in 4 separate signature fields, each one slightly different from the others, which told me something immediately. Whoever had done this had not been consistent. They had practiced, but they had not been careful. And in my line of work, inconsistency is always where the truth lives. I poured a glass of water, sat down at the table, and read every line of every document twice. The guarantor agreement was the heaviest. 11 pages, dense with liability clauses and payment escalation terms. Under the guarantor section, the language was unambiguous. The named guarantor assumed full financial responsibility in the event of default by the primary contracting party. The primary contracting party on every single document was listed as Roland and Cecile Voss. My parents had signed the event contracts themselves. They had simply added my name underneath theirs as the guarantor, the person the venue and vendors could pursue if Roland and Cecile didn't pay. They had used my name as a financial safety net without telling me, without asking me, without giving me the chance to say no. I sat with that for a long time. Not because I was shocked. Somewhere below the surface, a part of me that had been keeping score for 31 years was not shocked at all. I sat with it because I needed to be precise about what I was feeling before I decided what to do next. Anger was there, yes. But underneath the anger was something cleaner and colder. The recognition of a professional. This was not just a family betrayal. This was document fraud. And document fraud was something I knew exactly how to handle. I called my closest friend, a woman named Priya Anand, at 9:30 that evening. Priya was a paralegal at a civil litigation firm in Houston and had been my closest friend since our first year at UT Austin, where we had bonded over a shared dislike of an unreasonable contracts professor and a mutual appreciation for very strong coffee. She picked up on the second ring, heard my voice, and said immediately, "What happened?" I told her everything. The collections notice, the 4 documents, the signatures that weren't mine, the guarantor language, the $41,000 total. She was quiet through all of it in the way that people who work with legal documents are quiet. Absorbing, organizing, filing. When I finished, she said, "Don't call your parents yet. I want to see the documents first." She was at my apartment by 10:30 with her laptop under her arm and a legal pad she'd grabbed on the way out. We sat at the kitchen table, the 4 documents spread between us, and Priya went through them the way she goes through everything, methodically, without expression, until she had seen what she needed to see. Then she looked up. "This is forgery, Aurelia. Clear and simple. The signatures don't even match each other, let alone a verified sample of yours." She tapped the guarantor agreement. "This is the document the venue will use to pursue you. If you don't act, they will take you to collections and eventually to court, and they will win, because your name is on the line. But they won't win if the signature is proven fraudulent." I already knew that. What I needed from Priya was not the legal interpretation. I needed someone to sit across from me and confirm that what I was seeing was real, that I had not misread the situation, that this was exactly as serious as it felt. She confirmed it without flinching. We spent the next hour mapping out the approach. First, obtain verified copies of all original contracts directly from each vendor and the venue. Second, submit a formal written dispute to each party, stating clearly that I had not signed the documents, and requesting that all collection activity be suspended pending investigation. Third, gather a verified signature sample, my passport, my driver's license, a notarized document from my employer, so that a proper comparison could be made. Priya drafted the dispute letter template while I pulled my identification documents and made copies. By midnight we had a plan. By 1 in the morning the letters were drafted and ready to send. Priya paused at the door on her way out and looked at me with the expression she reserves for things she considers important. "Don't let them make you feel like you owe them an explanation," she said. "You don't owe anyone an explanation for refusing to pay a debt you didn't create." I nodded and locked the door after her. The 4 documents were still on the table. I stacked them neatly, put them in a manila folder, labeled it in black marker with the date, the total amount, and 3 words. Not my signature. My mother called the next morning at 8:45. I answered because I had decided the night before to let the other side speak first. You learn more from listening than from talking, and I needed to know exactly how much they understood about what they had done. "Aurelia," her voice was careful, positioned somewhere between concerned and casual. the tone she uses when she wants to deliver difficult information without appearing to be the one delivering it. We received a notice from the grand veranda. There seems to be some confusion about the payment for Odette's debut. I was wondering if you'd had a chance to look into it. Some confusion. $41,000 and a forged signature, and my mother was calling it some confusion. Mom, I said, I received the collections notice. I've reviewed all 4 documents. She made a soft sound, something between agreement and deflection. Yes, well, your father handled most of the planning details. He may have filled in your name as a reference point. A reference point. Not guarantor. Not signature. A reference point. I want to be clear about something, I said, and I kept my voice level the way I keep it level in a client meeting when the numbers don't add up. My name on a guarantor agreement is not a legal reference point. It is a legal obligation. I did not sign those documents and I did not authorize anyone to sign them on my behalf. Pause. Longer than it should have been if this had genuinely been a confusion. Aurelia, we didn't think you'd mind. You have a good income. The venue required a guarantor and our credit isn't what it was. We just needed someone with a clean financial record. We thought you understood that being family meant stepping in when it mattered. I set my pen down on the desk very quietly. You thought I understood, I said. Without asking me. Without telling me a contract existed. Without giving me the opportunity to say yes or no. She tried once more. If you could just speak to the venue and let them know you'll be covering the balance temporarily. No. The word came out cleanly with no hesitation and no apology wrapped around it. That single syllable landed in the silence between us like something solid hitting a floor. I'm sending formal dispute letters to the venue and all 3 vendors today. My name was placed on those contracts without my knowledge or consent. That makes the signatures fraudulent. I'm not covering anything temporarily or otherwise. When my mother spoke again, the careful casualness was completely gone. You're really going to do this, she said. Make it into something bigger than it needs to be. I'm going to do exactly what I do for a living, I said. I'm going to follow the documents wherever they lead. She hung up without saying goodbye. The responses from the vendors started arriving within 48 hours. The Grand Veranda Ballroom's events coordinator, a measured woman named Ms. Fontaine, called me directly. Her tone shifted the moment I told her I had not signed the guarantor agreement. She went from polite efficiency to a careful, deliberate quiet that told me she had immediately grasped the weight of what I was saying. She confirmed that all collection activity directed at me would be paused pending an internal review. That pause was everything. Because in that pause, my parents' plan had already started coming apart at the seams. They had attached my name to 4 contracts, invited me to the event so I would appear visibly involved, and built the scaffolding of my participation around me without my knowledge. What they had not accounted for was that I would come home, read every line, and refuse to hold the structure up. I opened my laptop and created a new document. I titled it, Timeline. And I began writing down every date, every call, every document, every word my mother had said that morning. In financial auditing, a timeline is how you find the shape of what actually happened underneath the shape of what someone wanted you to see. I had a feeling this one was going to be very revealing. The timeline I built over the next 3 days was not dramatic. It was not emotional. It was a clean chronological record of every interaction, every document, every phone call, every date stamp I could verify. The kind of paper trail that doesn't argue with anyone because it doesn't need to. It simply exists and it tells the truth whether or not anyone in the room is comfortable with that truth. I had learned early in my auditing career that the most dangerous thing you can hand someone who has been lying is an organized timeline. Not because it attacks them. Because it removes every place they have left to hide. I requested the original signed copies from each vendor formally and in writing. Magnolia and Table responded within 24 hours. Celestine Blooms responded the following morning. The Crescent Ensemble sent their copy by end of day Thursday. The Grand Veranda Ballroom, through Ms. Fontaine, sent a full 11-page scan of the guarantor agreement along with a note confirming their legal department had flagged the dispute for review. I printed every document, hole-punched them, and placed them in a binder with labeled dividers. 1 section per vendor. 1 section for my verified signature samples. 1 section for correspondence. Priya came over on Friday evening and we went through the binder together. She had brought her own notes from her firm's internal reference files on document fraud statutes in Louisiana, since the contracts had all been executed there. She spread her pages out on the kitchen table next to mine and we worked through it the way we used to work through difficult exam problems in college. Quietly, methodically, each of us taking a different angle and meeting in the middle. What emerged from that evening was not just a legal picture. It was a behavioral one. Someone had gone to 4 separate businesses over the course of several weeks, presented themselves with documentation and signed my name repeatedly. This was not an impulsive mistake. This required planning. This required deliberate, repeated choice. I said that out loud and Priya looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup and said, "I know. And I think you already know who." I did know. I had known since the morning my mother called it some confusion. But knowing and being able to prove it are two different things, and I was not interested in accusations. I was interested in evidence. There is a particular discipline that financial auditing teaches you that most people never develop. The ability to sit with what you know and wait until the documentation catches up. Patience in the presence of certainty. I had been practicing it for 6 years professionally. I was about to practice it personally. The extended family involvement began on a Saturday, 8 days after the collections notice arrived. My mother's older sister, Aunt Lorraine, called me at 11 in the morning with the smooth, unhurried tone of a woman who believes she is doing you a favor by intervening. "Aurelia, sweetheart, your mother is beside herself. She says there's been a misunderstanding about some paperwork and that you're refusing to help. I want you to know that your father and mother have given everything for this family." Odette's debut was a once-in-a-lifetime occasion, and I think if you really search your heart, you'll find that $41,000 is a small price to pay for your sister's happiness and your parents' peace of mind. I listened to the entire speech without interrupting. When she finished I said, "Aunt Lorraine, I appreciate you calling. I didn't sign those contracts." She paused. "Well, your mother says the paperwork is complicated and that you may not remember agreeing to it." I may not remember agreeing to it. As though the act of signing a legal document guaranteeing $41,000 was the kind of thing a person simply forgot. I told her I had the documents in front of me, that none of the signatures were mine, and that I had already submitted formal disputes to each vendor. Another pause, longer this time. "I'll let your mother know we spoke," she said, and hung up with the stiff politeness of someone who had expected a different outcome. The calls continued across the following week with a consistency that told me they had been coordinated. My father's brother, Uncle Desmond, left a voicemail describing me as ungrateful and cold. My mother's college friend, a woman named Mrs. Thibodeau who had attended the debut and apparently considered herself a family stakeholder, sent a text message informing me that community reputation mattered and that dragging a family matter into legal territory was not something a well-raised young woman would do. 2 cousins I had not spoken to in over a year sent separate messages within hours of each other, both using almost identical language about family loyalty and financial responsibility, which told me they had been given a script. I saved every single one. Screenshots of texts. Recordings of voicemails, which is legal in Texas under one-party consent. I did not respond to any of them. I added each contact to the timeline with the date, the medium, and a one-line summary of the message. By the end of the week I had documented 11 separate attempts by family members to pressure me into absorbing the debt. 11 people who had been told a version of events that did not include the word forgery. Then something shifted. On a Wednesday afternoon, I received a text from my cousin Marcus, Aunt Lorraine's youngest son, who was 24 and worked in IT in Baton Rouge. He and I had never been particularly close, but he had always been the quietest person in any room, the one who observed more than he participated. The text said, "Hey, I don't think I'm getting the full story here. Mom keeps saying you're being difficult, but that doesn't sound like you. Can we talk?" I stared at that message for a long time. 11 people had contacted me to deliver pressure and not one of them had asked a single question. Marcus had asked 2 in 4 sentences. I typed back, "Yes. Call me when you're free." He called that evening and I told him the truth. Not the emotional version, not the wounded version, but the factual one. The 4 contracts. The forged signatures. The formal disputes. The vendors' responses. He was quiet through all of it, and when I finished he said, "So they used your name without telling you?" "Yes. And now they want you to just pay it?" "Yes." He exhaled. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's not even a family argument. That's a crime." "I know," I said. He was quiet again for a moment. "What do you need from me?" "Just keep your eyes open," I told him. He said he would. One person out of 11 who thought to ask what actually happened. I noted the conversation in the timeline and moved on. The break in the documentation came from an unexpected direction. On Thursday morning, 4 days after Marcus called, I received an email from Celestine Blooms, the florist. It was not from their legal department. It was from the owner herself, a woman named Diane Celestine, and it was sent from her personal business address. The subject line read, "Regarding your dispute, something I thought you should know." She wrote that she had been thinking about my dispute since receiving my letter. She said that she personally handled all contract paperwork for large events and that she remembered the Voss booking clearly because the woman who had come in to finalize the guarantor paperwork had seemed nervous and had asked several questions about whether the guarantor needed to be present in person. The florist had explained that a signature on the form was sufficient. The woman had then produced a printed form with the guarantor section already completed and signed, and had simply asked Diane to attach it to the contract file. The woman who came in. Not my mother. The way she wrote it, nervous, asking about whether the guarantor needed to be present, that was not my mother's behavior. My mother does not ask questions that reveal uncertainty. She performs confidence regardless of what she knows. The person who came into that flower shop asking whether the guarantor needed to be there in person was someone who was not entirely sure the forgery would hold up to scrutiny. Someone younger, perhaps. Someone who had been sent to do the errand because someone else didn't want to do it themselves. I forwarded Diane's email to Priya immediately. Priya called me within 10 minutes. "This changes the picture," she said. "If your mother didn't personally execute the forged documents, someone else did. Someone went to these vendors on her behalf. And that someone was nervous about it. Which means they knew exactly what they were doing." "I know," I said. "I've been thinking about the same thing." We sat with that for a moment, the two of us on the phone, in the particular silence that comes when a situation you thought you understood has just revealed an additional layer. I thought about the debut. About Odette descending the staircase in that cathedral-length gown. About the way she had held on for one extra second at the end of the night. I thought about the note she had written. "I know things have been distant, but I want you there." And then I thought about something I had overlooked. She hadn't just written that note. She had known when she wrote it what that invitation was actually for. She had written Ray in her girlish handwriting and tucked it inside an envelope, knowing that on the other side of that envelope was a set of contracts with my forged name on them, knowing that the invitation was not an olive branch but a mechanism, a way to make my presence at the event look like participation, look like consent, look like I had known and agreed and shown up willingly. She had written come, and she had meant something entirely different by it than what I had read. I opened the timeline document on my laptop and added a new entry at the top. Not a date. Not a document reference. Just a single line that reframed everything below it. This was not a decision made in desperation, I wrote. This was a plan. Odette called on a Friday afternoon, 12 days after the collections notice arrived. I had been expecting it. Not because I had any particular insight into her timing, but because the pattern had been predictable from the beginning. First my mother with the soft approach, then the extended family with the coordinated pressure, and now Odette, which meant the softer angles had failed and they were moving to the one they believed would hit closest to the center. She opened with my name, just Aurelia, flat and unadorned, the way you say a word when you've been rehearsing the conversation in your head and you want to establish from the first syllable that you are the reasonable one. "I heard you've been contacting the vendors." Her voice had that particular quality I recognized from childhood. Not quite accusatory, not quite wounded, positioned precisely in the space between both so that any response I gave could be reframed as an attack. I told her yes, I had contacted the vendors because my name was on their contracts and I had not signed those contracts. She exhaled slowly. "Aurelia, this is not as simple as you're making it." "Nothing about this is simple," I said. "I agree with you on that." She shifted. "Mom and Dad were in a really difficult position. The venue required a guarantor and they didn't have anyone else to ask. They didn't ask me either," I said. "That's the part you keep leaving out." Pause. "Then we thought you'd understand. We assumed that if you knew you'd say yes anyway, so it seemed easier to just handle it." I want you to hear what she said there because I replayed it in my mind for a long time afterward. "We assumed you'd say yes anyway. They had not forged my signature because they were desperate and had no other option. They had forged my signature because they had decided in advance what my answer would be, and they had simply skipped the inconvenience of asking. They had made a choice on my behalf without my knowledge, attached my name to $41,000 of legal obligation, and then invited me to the event so the story would look clean. Odette, I said, who went to the vendors? Who physically walked into those businesses and submitted the paperwork? Silence. Longer than it should have been. I don't know what you mean. You do know what I mean. A florist has told me in writing that a nervous young woman came in and dropped off a pre-signed guarantor form. That was not our mother. So I am asking you directly, who went to those vendors? The silence stretched for 5 full seconds. I counted. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted registers entirely, the careful positioning gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like the version of my sister that existed before the performance became permanent. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she said. And that was all. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Not I didn't do it, not I don't know what you're talking about, not the denial I would have expected if the answer were no. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Which was the closest thing to a confession she was willing to give me over the phone. I ended the call 2 minutes later without raising my voice. I sat at my desk for a moment and looked at the binder on the corner of the table. Then I picked up my phone and typed a message to Priya. She confirmed it without confirming it. Priya responded in under a minute. Screenshot the call log. Note the time, the duration, and write down her exact words right now before the phrasing softens in your memory. I did exactly that. I wrote Odette's words verbatim into the timeline document, time-stamped, and saved 2 copies in separate locations. Then I added a new line underneath. Subject is aware of the scheme and was likely the executor. Confirmed indirectly. Date and time noted. The following day brought a development I had not anticipated. My father called. Roland Voss was not a man who made phone calls when things got difficult. He was a man who stayed in the background while my mother managed the narrative and stepped forward only when he believed the moment required a show of authority. The fact that he was calling me directly meant one of 2 things. Either my mother had run out of angles and had sent him in as a last measure, or something had changed in the conversation they were having at home that had made him decide to handle this himself. His voice was not the authority voice. It was something quieter than that, something I had not heard from him in a long time, maybe ever. Aurelia. He said my name the way people say names when they are not sure what comes after it. I waited. I know things have gone further than they should have. He stopped. Started again. Your mother and I, we made decisions we should have talked to you about first. And I'm aware that saying that now after the fact is not enough. But I want you to understand that we were not trying to hurt you. We were trying to give your sister something. I know, I said. I know what you were trying to do. What I can't accept is how you did it. He was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet I heard something I did not expect. Not defensiveness, not the low-grade belligerence that had always been his default when cornered, but something that sounded genuinely tired. We didn't think it would get to this point, he said. We thought the venue payment would work itself out and you would never need to know. You thought I would never find out that my name was on a $41,000 debt. He didn't answer that directly. Instead he said, is there any way we can resolve this without it going further? What does further mean to you, I asked. He paused. The legal side of things. The formal investigation. I heard the specific weight of what he was asking. He was not asking me to forgive them. He was asking me to stop the process that had been set in motion. The vendor investigations, the signature verifications, the formal disputes. Before those processes produced a conclusion that could not be walked back. I told him the truth. Dad, I didn't start a legal process. I disputed a debt that isn't mine. What happens as a result of that dispute is not in my hands. The venues and the vendors are conducting their own reviews. I cannot stop what I didn't start. Another silence. That's fair, he said finally, which surprised me more than anything else he had said. Then he added, I'm sorry, Aurelia. Just those 3 words, no qualifications after them, no pivot to what he needed from me. I sat with them for a moment. I told him I heard him. And I ended the call. I stepped away from my desk and stood at the kitchen window for a while, looking out at the west side of the city in the late afternoon light. Houston in November has a particular quality to it. Not quite summer, not quite anything else. The sky a flat pale blue that doesn't commit to a mood. I thought about my father saying I'm sorry and the way it had sounded. Not performed, not strategic, just depleted. And I thought about the fact that a depleted apology and a sincere one are not the same thing, and that I was not yet in a position to know which one I had received. What I did know was that the apology had arrived before any accountability had, which meant it was still functioning as a tool, even if the person wielding it no longer had the energy to do so with intention. Marcus texted that evening. He had been attending a family dinner at Aunt Lorraine's house and had sent me a message from the bathroom, which told me everything about the level of coordination still happening on that side of the family. He wrote, "Your mom gave a whole speech at dinner tonight. She's telling everyone the vendors are trying to take advantage of the family and that you're siding with strangers over your own blood." Aunt Lorraine cried. 3 people said they were going to write reviews online for the Grand Veranda to pressure them. I read that twice. They were attempting to apply public pressure to a venue that was in the middle of investigating a forgery. I forwarded Marcus's message to Priya. She responded with 4 words. "Save that. It matters." I saved it. I saved everything. The binder on my desk had grown to 2 inches thick. The timeline document had 47 separate entries. I had a verified signature comparison from a notarized professional document my firm had on file, 2 government-issued IDs, and a statement from Diane Celestine at the florist that identified a nervous young woman who had dropped off pre-signed paperwork. I had my mother's phone call where she called the entire thing some confusion. I had Odette's voice saying it wasn't supposed to go this far. I had my father's quiet admission that they had made decisions they should have talked to me about first. What I did not yet have was the formal determination from the Grand Veranda Ballroom's legal department. That was the piece that would make everything else irreversible. And according to Ms. Fontaine, it was coming within the week. I was not going to New Orleans for the confrontation. The confrontation was coming to me in the form of a document that no amount of family pressure campaigns or tearful dinners at Aunt Lorraine's could revise or retract. I closed the timeline document, set my phone face down on the desk, and made dinner for the first time in days. Something simple, something that required my hands to do something other than type and document and verify. While I cooked, I thought about Odette saying it wasn't supposed to go this far, and I wondered what she thought the acceptable distance was. How far was it supposed to go before it stopped being acceptable? How much of my name was she willing to spend before it cost her something? I was about to find out the answer to both of those questions at the same time. The formal determination arrived on a Tuesday morning at 7:52, while I was still in the middle of my first cup of coffee. The email came from the Grand Veranda Ballroom's legal department, a man named Mr. Arsenault, and the subject line was clinical and precise the way serious things always are. Guarantor Agreement Review, Determination of Findings. I set the cup down on the counter and read it standing up because sitting felt too casual for what I was about to receive. The letter was 4 paragraphs. The first paragraph outlined the scope of the review. The second described the methodology. A certified handwriting analyst had been engaged, my verified signature samples had been submitted for comparison, and staff witness accounts had been collected and reviewed. The third paragraph was the one that changed everything. The analyst had concluded with a high degree of professional certainty that the signature on the guarantor agreement did not match the verified signature of Aurelia Voss. The fourth paragraph contained the determination. The guarantor agreement was void and unenforceable as executed. All financial liability for the outstanding balance reverted immediately to the primary contracting parties, Roland and Cecile Voss. A revised invoice for the full amount of $41,000 would be issued to them directly. I was formally released from any and all obligation connected to the event. I read it 3 times. Then I forwarded it to Priya with no message attached because there was nothing I needed to say. She called me 40 seconds later and the first thing she said was, "It's done." "I know," I said. "All of it. Every dollar. Back to them." "I know." She exhaled. "How do you feel?" I thought about that honestly before I answered. I said, "Like someone just handed me back something that was always mine and I'm still figuring out that I'm allowed to hold it." Within 2 hours, Magnolia and Table and the Crescent Ensemble had each sent their own correspondence confirming that they were following the Grand Veranda's lead, suspending pursuit of the guarantor claim, and redirecting their invoices to Roland and Cecile Voss as the primary contracting parties. Celestine Blooms sent a brief note from Diane herself, 3 sentences, professional and warm, expressing that she was glad the matter had been resolved correctly. I added every document to the binder, labeled a new divider tab, determinations, and closed it for the last time. Then I called my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring and I could hear from the quality of the silence before she spoke that she already knew. Word travels fast in families that run on information management, and the vendors would have contacted my parents directly with the revised invoices by now. Aurelia, she said, and the careful positioning from every previous call was completely absent. What was left underneath it was something I had rarely heard from my mother. Not grief exactly, but the sound of a person who has been performing a particular version of events for so long that when the version finally collapses, there is nothing immediately ready to replace it. I'm not calling to argue, I told her. The determinations have come in from the venue and the vendors. My name has been formally cleared. The invoices have been redirected to you and Dad. I know, she said quietly. We received them this morning. I want you to understand something, I said, and I chose the next words carefully because I had been thinking about them for days. I am not pressing for criminal charges. That is a decision I've made deliberately, and I'm telling you now so you don't spend the next weeks waiting to find out. A long pause. Then, thank you. I want you to also understand, I continued, that thank you is not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is for this to never happen again. Not my name. Not my signature. Not my financial record. Not under any circumstances, for any reason, no matter what story you tell yourselves about why it would be acceptable. Her voice was very small when she answered. I understand, she said. I ended the call and sat at the kitchen table and felt the particular stillness that follows the moment when something you have been bracing against for weeks finally stops pressing. It was not triumph. It did not feel the way I had imagined resolution might feel in the early days of the timeline document and the binder and the dispute letters. It felt quieter than that. More like the end of a long physical effort. The moment you set something heavy down and your arms don't know yet what to do without the weight. Odette called that afternoon. Not the calculated, repositioned version of my sister from the previous call. This was different. Her voice was stripped in the way voices get when someone has spent the morning crying and has run out of the energy required to conceal it. I heard it in the first syllable, and I let her talk without interrupting because I had waited long enough to hear what she would say when there was nothing left to protect. She told me she was the one who had gone to the vendors. She said it plainly, without the hedging and the half-confessions of the previous call, and I understood that the formal determination had removed the last reason she had to keep the partial story intact. She said she had visited Magnolia and Table Celestine Blooms, and the Crescent Ensemble over the course of 3 separate weeks in September, carrying printed forms with the guarantor section already signed by our mother from a copy of my signature on an old tax document they had found in a filing cabinet. She had asked each vendor the same question about whether the guarantor needed to be present. When they said no, she had handed over the form and left. She said she had told herself it was just paperwork. That it wouldn't matter because the family would figure out the payments eventually and the debt would dissolve quietly the way she had assumed debts did when people eventually got around to handling them. I let her finish. Then I said, "You wrote me a note. You signed it, Ray. You asked me to come." She was quiet. "I know. Did you write it because you wanted me there or because you needed me to appear to be involved?" Another silence, longer this time, the kind that is its own answer. "Both," she said finally. That was the most honest thing she had said to me in years, and I recognized it as such even though what it confirmed was worse than a clean lie would have been. Both meant she had wanted her sister and used that wanting as a mechanism at the same time. Both meant the note was real and the note was a tool, and she had held both of those things simultaneously without letting either one cancel the other out. I told her I wasn't going to tell her how to feel about what she had done. I told her that was work she would have to do herself and that I could not do it for her and would not try. What I told her clearly was that the path back to anything resembling a relationship between us would have to be built by her, from her side, with actions and not with handwritten notes that carried 2 meanings at once. She was crying by the end of it, not the controlled tears of performance but something rawer than that. I did not tell her it was going to be fine. I did not know if it was going to be fine, and I had spent enough of my life offering comfort that I hadn't verified. 3 days later Marcus called. Not a text this time. A call, which meant he had something he wanted to say in full. He told me that the family dinner conversation had shifted entirely. Aunt Lorraine had apparently confronted my mother directly after the vendor determinations became known through the family network, and my mother had confirmed, in front of several family members, that the signatures had been produced from a copy of my old tax document. Aunt Lorraine had gone quiet in the way that people go quiet when they realize the story they were handed was not the story that was true. Uncle Desmond had left the dinner early. The cousin who had accused me of choosing money over blood had not texted since the determination came in. Marcus said, "Most of them feel terrible." "I know," I said. "Most of them should." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" I thought about that the same way I had thought about Priya's question the morning the determination arrived. I said, "I'm getting there." He said, "For what it's worth, you handled all of this with more discipline than most people could have managed." I appreciated that word. Discipline. Not strength, not bravery, not the language people usually reach for in these situations. Discipline. The thing that is not glamorous and does not feel heroic in the moment but is the only thing that actually holds when everything else is in motion. The formal notification from the Grand Veranda's legal department had released me from $41,000 of fraudulent debt. But what I was still carrying, what no document could formally resolve, was the particular weight of understanding that the people who were supposed to choose you first had instead chosen to use you as a financial instrument, quietly, deliberately, and with enough planning that it required weeks of visits to separate vendors and a handwritten note designed to look like a reconciliation. I sat at my kitchen table that evening with the closed binder in front of me and a cup of tea I hadn't touched, and I thought about all the things I had documented over the past weeks. Every call. Every message. Every signature comparison. Every vendor response. I had built the most thorough record of my own family's betrayal that I was capable of building, and I had used it to protect myself completely. What I had not yet figured out was what came after protection. What you do with your hands once you have put down everything you have been carrying for longer than just the past few weeks. That was the question sitting on the other side of all of it. And I was only just beginning to understand that answering it was going to take considerably more time than building a binder ever had. 3 months is not a long time. In the scope of a life it is barely a breath. 12 weeks, 90 days, a season changing from one thing to the next without asking your permission. And yet in 3 months, the entire architecture of my family rearranged itself in ways that no amount of planning or documentation or formal determination could have predicted. I watched it happen from Houston, from the window of my one-bedroom apartment on the west side of the city, the way you watch weather move across a flat landscape. Slowly at first, then all at once. Roland and Cecile Voss received the revised invoices from all 4 vendors within the same week. The Grand Veranda ballroom alone was $28,000. Magnolia and Table carried another $7,500. The Crescent Ensemble billed $3,200. Celestine Blooms added the remaining $2,300. Together, the total landed at exactly $41,000. The same number that had appeared at the top of the collections notice with my name above it, now redirected entirely to theirs. My father's event rental company had been operating at a loss for 2 years. Their personal savings had been largely depleted, covering the gap. The invoices arrived like stones dropped into an already shallow pool. My father sold the company van first. Then the equipment trailer that had been parked behind the house for a decade, the one he used to transport lighting rigs and folding tables to corporate events and private parties across the North Shore. He negotiated a payment plan with the Grand Veranda directly, $800 a month, which pushed their financial recovery timeline back by years. My mother, who had not worked outside the house in over 2 decades, took a position at a medical billing office in Metairie. She told me this herself in a phone call 6 weeks after the determinations came in. Her voice when she described it was not ashamed exactly, but it had the careful flatness of someone reporting a fact they have not yet fully absorbed. I listened without offering commentary. What she was describing was consequence, and consequence does not require my editorial input to be real. Odette's situation unfolded differently and in some ways more painfully to witness, even from a distance, even through the filter of everything she had done. Her fiancé, a man named Sebastian whom she had been with for 2 years and who had attended the debut in the front row beside family friends, had known nothing about the guarantor scheme. He found out the way peripheral people always find out in these situations. Not from Odette, not directly, but from the ambient information that spreads through a family network once the formal version of events has collapsed and people start filling in what they actually know. A mutual friend mentioned it. Sebastian asked Odette directly. And Odette, stripped of the scaffolding she had been relying on, told him the truth in the way that people tell the truth when they have run entirely out of alternatives. He did not leave immediately. He is not that kind of person, from what Marcus told me. He is the kind of person who sits with difficult information and takes time to understand what it means before he decides what to do with it. But he asked questions that Odette had no clean answers to, questions about what she had been thinking, about whether she had considered what would happen to me, about whether the person he had agreed to build a life with was someone who would use a family member's identity as a financial instrument for the sake of a debut. Those are not questions with easy answers. Anne Odette, to her credit or perhaps simply because she was exhausted from the effort of performing, did not try to give easy ones. They postponed their engagement. Not ended, postponed, which in some ways is harder than a clean break because it requires both people to sit inside the uncertainty and keep functioning anyway. Marcus told me this in a phone call in January and I listened without the reaction he may have been expecting. I did not feel satisfaction. I want to be honest about that because it would be easy to say I did and have it read as strength. What I actually felt was something closer to recognition. The particular recognition of watching someone else discover that there are prices attached to choices that seemed, at the time of making them, entirely costless. Aunt Lorraine sent a card. A physical card, handwritten, mailed from her address in Metairie, which told me she had looked up my Houston address deliberately rather than texting or emailing, which told me she understood the weight of what she was putting on paper and wanted it to feel appropriately considered. She wrote that she had asked my mother a direct question and had been lied to directly in response, and that she was sorry for the role she had played in applying pressure without first asking whether the pressure was warranted. She did not ask for forgiveness. She simply stated what she had done and said she was sorry for it, which is rarer than people realize and worth acknowledging. I wrote back a short note for sentences. I thanked her for saying what she said and told her I didn't hold what she didn't know against her. That was true. I sent it on a Wednesday and didn't think about it again. Uncle Desmond called once, left a voicemail that lasted 45 seconds and consisted almost entirely of throat clearing and rearranged starts, and ultimately said that he had perhaps spoken out of turn and hoped I was doing well. I saved the voicemail to the timeline folder out of habit and then deleted the folder entirely a week later, because I had decided that the documentation phase of this experience was over and that carrying the archive forward was not the same thing as being prepared. It was just carrying. Priya took me to dinner in February at a restaurant in Midtown that she had been trying to get me to visit for months. We sat at a corner table and ate pasta and talked about her caseload and my recent audit project and a book we had both read separately and discovered we disagreed about entirely. At some point toward the end of the meal she said without preamble, the way she says things that matter, "I want to ask you something and I want you to actually answer it." I told her to go ahead. She said, "Are you different now than you were before the collections notice arrived?" I thought about that for a long time before I answered. The pasta got cold. Priya waited, which she is good at. I said, "I think I'm more certain." "About what?" she asked. "About what I'm willing to carry," I said. "And what I'm not." She nodded once and picked up her fork, and that was the end of the conversation, which is one of the reasons she has been my closest friend for over a decade. I called Odette in March. It was a Sunday evening, Houston to New Orleans, the sky outside my window going the particular shade of deep blue it turns in early spring when the light hasn't fully decided to leave yet. She answered on the second ring and I could hear in her voice that she had not expected it to be me. Not this soon, not voluntarily, not without a reason attached. I told her I wasn't calling with an agenda. I told her I was calling because she was my sister and I had decided that keeping a door open was not the same thing as walking back through it unprepared. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "I don't know how to start." I said, "Neither do I. So let's just talk." We talked for 40 minutes about nothing consequential. Her new position at a design firm she had started in November, my audit project, a restaurant in New Orleans she had been to twice that she thought I would like. We did not talk about the debut or the contracts or Sebastian or what she had done. There would be time for those conversations later or there would not, and either way the decision would belong to both of us rather than just to the weight of what had already happened. When the call ended I stayed at the window for a long time. The river in Houston is nothing like the water on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain where I grew up, but at night from the right angle water is water and it moves the same way regardless of what banks it runs between. I thought about the person who had stood in the lobby of this building 4 months ago holding an ivory envelope with her mother's handwriting on the front, thinking it might be evidence that things had changed. I thought about what it had cost her to believe that, and what it had ultimately given her permission to stop believing. Here is what I know now that I did not know then. Being the responsible one does not mean being the one who absorbs everything. Being the capable one does not mean being the one who covers what everyone else refuses to carry. Having a good income and a clean financial record and a career built on reading documents carefully does not make your name a resource that other people are entitled to borrow. Your name belongs to you. Your signature belongs to you. What you choose to put them on, and what you refuse, belongs to you entirely. I am 31 years old. I am a financial auditor. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Houston where every piece of furniture was chosen deliberately and paid for completely and belongs to no one but me. I am learning still what it means to treat my own name with the same precision I bring to every document I have ever been handed professionally. I am learning that no is a complete sentence and that protecting yourself is not the same as being cold, and that the people who tell you otherwise are usually the ones who benefit most from your warmth. Nobody signs my name but me. I understood that as a professional long before I understood it as a person. Now I understand it as both. And that, finally, is enough. If this story made you feel something, don't just scroll away. There are so many stories out there that never get told, and here on Confira Stories we bring them to life. So if you enjoy emotional, real-life drama like this, take a second to subscribe and be part of the journey. And if you've ever been in a situation like this, or have a story of your own, share it in the comments. I read them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.